Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I am Ryan Wormley, still filling in for Joey P., who is on what I guess he would probably call a much-needed vacation from the rest of us. Joining me today is Andrew Erickson, and also a special guest, who I will start with, Corey Buschlen, co-founder of the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Welcome to the show. It is your first time on the show, so how are you feeling, Corey?
I'm doing good. I was telling you pre-show, I've been listening, since 2016, 2017. So really an honor to be on Fantasy Pros for the first time.
It's an honor to have you too, an OG listener. So we're definitely looking forward to hearing what you have to say today. Erickson, how is your week going without Joey P in your life?
I mean, we don't need Joey P. We got Maverick on the show today. So Maverick is hosting. I'm pumped. I saw Top Gun a couple weeks back, and I'm not one to love action movies because I think that a lot of it is just all of this CGI, just big explosions and these robots fighting each other. But Top Gun, an action movie with realism in it, was fantastic. So, yeah.
I totally agree. I think Maverick is one of the best movies I've seen in theaters in years. I mean, it was excellent. For those who aren't watching on YouTube, he's calling me Maverick because I am currently rocking a Maverick-esque, or I guess it's really a rooster-esque mustache, what Miles Teller had in the show. Not trying to be Steve Harvey like in the Fantasy Feud episodes or anything like that. Just having a little fun with it. In Joey P's absence, as always, I want to make sure the listeners can find the three of us online. Erickson's Twitter handle is @AndrewErickson_. Corey is @FootballStock, and I can be found @Ryan Wormley. That's Wormley, like how you dress when it's cold outside. And of course, we can be found everywhere online @Fantasy Pros. We've also got some exciting news for those who may have missed it. Last week, Fantasy Pros dropped the 2022 Fantasy Football Draft Kit. Just head to fantasypros.com/kit. And when you get there, you'll find everything you need to dominate draft season, including rankings from each of our analysts, ADP information, player profiles, position primers, and all sorts of draft and strategy guides. A ton of the content is free, but if you want to get the most out of this year's kit, you have to become a Fantasy Pros subscriber. So go premium today if you haven't already, and head to our Fantasy Football Draft Kit at fantasypros.com/kit. And oh, by the way, if you're not a premium subscriber yet, we have an amazing deal going on right now that allows you to go premium for 12 months without paying us a dime. Just head over to fantasypros.com/offers to claim this deal right now. Again, that's fantasypros.com/offers. Fellas, let's jump into the show. Today, we're talking about running backs to avoid. We don't want to fall into the trap of some of these running backs that are ranked fairly highly. We're going to be going through tiers 1 through 5 in the expert consensus rankings. We're going to be using the half-point PPR rankings today. But if anybody wants to follow along, you can go to fantasypros.com/rankings, and you can see all the rankings there. You can look at PPR standard, everything. We got them from all the best experts in the industry. For each of these, we're going to share where they're ranked right now on ECR, and then Corey and Erickson will share where they think these guys should be ranked instead and why they're not quite as high on them and not drafting them where they're currently ranked. Does that all sound good, fellas?
Let's rock and roll.
Let's do it. We're going to start right at the top with tier 1. The running backs in this group are Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Austin Ekeler, and Derrick Henry. Corey, since you're the guest, I'm just going to spoil this for everyone. You didn't pick any of these guys, and I'm going to let you go first and explain why. Erickson is also notorious for breaking the rules of the show, so it's actually kind of fitting that you guys are on together and your very first tier, you don't want to do anybody, but I am going to allow it. And can you explain for us your thinking on why you aren't avoiding any of these 4 names?
Yeah, so for me at the top of the draft board, I'm always looking for that like league winning season, 20 plus point per game type of score. And I see a path for all 4 of those guys to do it. Jonathan Taylor, obviously heavy carry usage, heavy red zone usage. Christian McCaffrey, we know what he is when he's healthy. Austin Ekeler, obviously receiving volume and touchdowns were his bread and butter last year. And Derrick Henry, to me, it's kind of hypocritical for us to say that if Christian McCaffrey stays healthy, he'll be great when we know that Derrick Henry on a points per game basis was better than Jonathan Taylor last year. So while some of those guys have their own individual concerns, I'm totally fine with all 4 of them at the top of the draft.
If you were forced to pick one of them, like the gun to your head, you have to pick somebody, who would it be?
It would be Derrick Henry because he's a little older. He's got a lot of touches under his belt, coming off of a foot injury. I talked to Edwin Porras yesterday when I recorded, and he's mildly concerned about Derrick Henry's health. But again, if I'm going to make the health concessions for Christian McCaffrey, I should probably make them for Derrick Henry as well. So for both of those guys, there's the concern of the injury history and all that kind of stuff a little bit up there in terms of a touch workload and age, but those risks are worth the reward if those guys can stay on the field.
Yeah, Austin Ekeler, maybe like sneaky older than you might think just because he came on a little later in his career. McCaffrey, obviously, the injury concerns more recently. And Derrick Henry, of course, the injury concern last season. Erickson, did Corey convince you shouldn't be picking anybody in this tier, or are you still going to go with a name or two?
Well, I do want to mention two guys here because I think that there's a conversation to talk about. Look, the reason these running backs are going so high is because they're elite running backs. Like, no one's going to debate whether they should be first-round picks. But the question becomes, do I draft a wide receiver instead of one of these running backs? I think that's really where the discussion point is. And in the case of Derrick Henry, I feel more comfortable drafting some wide receivers instead of Derrick Henry. Some of the points that our guest mentioned already, but the receiving usage for Derrick Henry, non-existent. Like, it still doesn't exist. And he has to average 30 touches per game. Like, that can't get any higher. Like, I thought it couldn't get any higher after his 2,000 rushing yard season, and then it did. I just can't envision this team where he's the entire offense, and if he breaks down, like, the Titans are sunk. Last year, they were the number one seed in the AFC, and we all knew that was kind of fake. They're going to regress. They're not going to have as many positive game scripts. What happens when they trail in games? Is Derrick Henry still going to be rushing the ball 30 times per game? Like, maybe, but that has to happen for him to be worth the 4th overall pick. So 27th ranked offensive line per PFF, 26th ranked offense based on aggregate ADP is the Tennessee Titans. Look, Henry was invincible until he broke down last year. He showed that he is that he is mortal last year. And it just takes one injury. McCaffrey was not injury prone until he got hurt 2 years in a row. What if Derrick Henry gets hurt 2 years in a row? I just feel more comfortable taking a guy like a Justin Jefferson instead of a Derrick Henry. And then with Austin Ekeler, it's just the touchdowns. He scored 20 touchdowns last year. That's just really hard to do in back-to-back seasons. Now, you can argue, he's on the Chargers, like the upside's going to be there for him. Okay, well, the upside's there for Mike Williams to catch 15 touchdowns. What about some of these other guys? Like, touchdowns aren't always going to happen to one running back or one player. Like, it changes. Like, touchdowns are volatile by nature. We know that. So plugging in Eckler's numbers from last year and expecting, he'll just do all the same stuff again. Like, if he scores 10 touchdowns, like, that's not a bad season, but that's significantly going to impact his production going in 2022. And Eckler's been vocal about having another running back step up. So Austin Eckler's been someone that's been very vocal and very front-facing about his like fantasy status. So I'm interested to kind of see how he approaches his offseason. If he's talking up Isaiah Spiller, for example, as the guy they drafted, as someone's going to have a significant role, I think we should believe Ekeler. But if Eckler's like, dude, Spiller sucks, like, I'm going to be the bell cow again, okay, then I'll probably feel more comfortable taking Ekeler. But yeah, I think with these two guys in particular, I think that receiver is definitely in play, specifically Justin Jefferson, who I think can put up bonkers numbers this year.
Yeah, the interesting thing with Henry is normally you might look at a running back who's the clear lead guy on the offense, and that offense loses their clear number one receiver, and you might say, oh, well, maybe they'll run the ball more and he'll get a heavier workload. It's almost impossible for Henry to get a heavier workload than he was already getting. It was already one of the run heaviest offenses in the NFL. So AJ Brown leaving, if anything, it just puts even more attention on Henry. It's not the bonus that it might be for running backs and certain other offenses. And then on Ekeler, Corey, I want to ask you, because I was going to ask about Isaiah Spiller. Do you see a path where Spiller maybe not completely overtakes Ekeler, but is in more of a timeshare, maybe even a 50-50 split by the time we get to, say, December?
Yeah, I mean, to Erickson's point, this was a complete outlier in terms of Austin Eckler's career touchdown output. 2 years ago, we were talking like he's not going to score 3 touchdowns again. Last year, he scores 20. So it's like a huge dichotomy of regression to both, extremes. So I agree. I think Spiller was brought in for a reason. And I would take all 3 of the top receivers over both Ekeler and Henry. To me, McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor are the clear, top 2 guys. And then I would take Kupp, Jefferson, and Chase over those other 2 running backs.
Yeah, we've addressed a couple of the flaws of maybe Henry, Ekeler, McCaffrey. We're not even going to bother with Taylor. He's obvious, like number one. Don't overthink it. Let's move on to tier number 2 here. Corey, you actually did pick a player in this tier, so I will let you go first here.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this guy's still going quite high to the point that he's almost a tier 1 running back. For me, Dalvin Cook is probably my biggest fade of the entire season this year. And my issue with Dalvin Cook is he almost perfectly mimics the outlook of 2021 Ezekiel Elliott, which was a player I was fading last year. So on my own channel, I conducted a study basically trying to figure out when formerly elite multi-time RB1 types like Dalvin Cook fall off from an efficiency standpoint, an injury standpoint, fantasy production standpoint. And the fall off actually ended up being around 27 years old, 1,100 career touches. Dalvin Cook will be 27 in August with 1,200 career touches, over 1,000 of those carries under his belt. Plus, we have a player who hasn't played more than 14 games in his career, which probably won't be aided by the fact that he has all this mileage under his belt. And finally, the biggest reason for me that Dalvin Cook is probably a guy that I think is just highly priced right now is because his efficiency fell off for the first time really of his career last year. He was tops of the league in yards per touch, tackles avoided per attempt, yards created per touch in 2019 and 2020 when he was an elite fantasy running back. Last year, 21st, 27th, 39th, respectively, in those categories. And his fantasy points over expected was negative for the first time in his entire career. And again, this has been a guy that has been among the most efficient running backs in the league for the last couple of years. And they lose their, play caller Gary Kubiak system. And while it's a similar system coming in with Kevin O'Connell, we have kind of gotten indications through Justin Jefferson that they might go a little bit more pass heavy.
Do you think the offense going pass heavier could help Cook if he's catching more passes out of the backfield?
It's possible, but he's not been a guy that's been heavily involved from like a route participation standpoint. It seems like they're going to mix in, Madison and any other kind of ancillary third down backs that they might want to deploy there too. So I think there's just a lot of risk behind Dalvin Cook. It's not necessarily that I think he's going to be terrible, because his path to elite production is going to be, touchdowns and a heavy workload. But I don't think all of the risk factors that I outlined are necessarily baked into his first round price tag. So where we're at the point in the draft where Dalvin Cook goes, I'm just going to take Devontae Adams or Stephon Diggs or one of the wide receivers, most likely at that point, and probably fade Dalvin Cook at his current price.
Cook is currently ranked 5th among the running backs. Where would you have him ranked at the position?
I have Dalvin Cook ranked at 10. So I have DeAndre Swift, Joe Mixon, Leonard Fournette, and Saquon Barkley all ranked ahead of Dalvin Cook.
Okay, now, Erickson, I know Debro is a big Dalvin Cook supporter. I'm actually not sure where you stand on Cook. Are you leaning more on Corey's side or what Debro would have said?
No, I like Dalvin Cook this year, and I think that Corey outlined a lot of good reasons, but I'm still looking at the volume, because volume trumps efficiency at the running back position. So last year, you look at Dalvin Cook, 15 goal line carries, ranked 4th in the NFL last season. He scored 3 touchdowns. He scored 6 touchdowns from last season when he's averaged 16 touchdowns per year from 2019 to 2020. So when we're targeting these guys that are overdue for positive regression, like Dalvin Cook is number 1. In terms of his fantasy points per game last year, where he was outside the top 10, a lot of it's because he just didn't score any touchdowns. Like, he didn't score enough, but his usage, 22 touches per game, was top 5. So I don't envision him necessarily losing a lot of that workload. I think that Alexander Mattison is still the backup there. So Dalvin Cook in an offense that, I just want a lot of pieces of this Vikings offense, honestly. Like, I think this offense is going to be high flying and scoring a ton of points. And if Dalvin Cook's part of it, I know he's only probably going to play like 13 or 14 games. And hey, then you have Alexander Mattison plug in those rest of those weeks. I think you're going to get, steady top 5 production. So, but I do like the points that Corey brought up. I was not really aware. I didn't necessarily look at Cook's efficiency numbers, but I think it's a really good point to bring it up that it's like, hey, if Cook is, delivering in the first half of the season, but his efficiency numbers suck, like, this may be a player that you want to try to get out of before it's too late. So I think it's a good point you brought up.
So, Corey, before we move off Cook, I want to ask you about the backups. Erickson mentioned Alexander Mattison. You made the comparison between Cook and Ezekiel Elliott. Do you see a comparison between Pollard and Mattison? Because right now there's a full tier gap between those two. Pollard's 30th among running backs in half-point PPR. Madison's 41st. Madison's a tier 6 guy. Pollard tier 5. Do you think those guys should be closer if you see the people that they would be overcoming as handcuffs as closer?
From an opportunity standpoint, we know when either Cook or Ezekiel Elliott has been off the field, we know both of those guys get the full workload. So from that perspective, they should definitely be in the same tier. The only difference is even though I'm lower on Dalvin Cook, I still believe in him a lot more than Ezekiel Elliott. So I still would favor Pollard in that situation. But at Madison's current price, he's one of my highest, rostered running backs on Underdog right now. So for me, I'm just going to fade the first round Dalvin Cook, get a lot of exposure to Alexander Mattison as my 4th or 5th running back on my redraft roster or on my best ball teams.
Erickson, let's get your pick here in tier 2. And I should have listed off these names. Tier 2 only has 4 names in it: Dalvin Cook, Najee Harris, Joe Mixon, and DeAndre Swift. Erickson, which one of those names are you picking?
Yeah, I really don't necessarily hate anyone in tier 2, so I kind of had to just pick one. So I went with Najee Harris, and it's basically, I don't think that he is going to be as great as he was last year. I think even if you look at the offense as a whole, he was the main benefactor of Big Ben having a decrepit arm. So he was basically able to catch a ton of dump-off passes from Ben Roethlisberger, and right now it looks like Mitchell Trubisky is going to be the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, does that mean more touchdown drives? I would say the case is not necessarily one way or the other. I mean, Trubisky hasn't necessarily been, this elite quarterback that's going to make this a top 10 offense for the Steelers. But what I do know about Trubisky is he is much more mobile than Ben Roethlisberger is. And he wants to get the ball and get first downs, and he's going to do it whatever way he needs to. And I think he's going to use his legs. So that means we're going to probably see less receptions from Najee Harris. I mean, him catching 75 plus passes for a second straight year seems very unlikely to me. You look at some of those Bears running backs, the more traditional running backs like a Jordan Howard, Dave Montgomery, they maxed out at 20, 25 catches per season with Trubisky. Now, a lot of it was because Tariq Cohen was also involved in the passing game, but there are other receivers that Trubisky can get the ball to with Freiermuth, Claypool, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson. So I don't think that Harris's receiving ceiling is necessarily there with Trubisky as the quarterback or Kenny Pickett. So I think that's something to kind of keep in mind with Harris. I do think Harris is really hard to envision him falling outside the top 7 to 10 range just because of the amount of volume that he's going to get. I think that he's this weirdly safe running back that you can draft because he's still pretty young relative to other NFL running backs, not necessarily to a second year running back per se. But, he doesn't have necessarily the wear and tear that a Derrick Henry does or a Dalvin Cook has. I have guys that have been in the NFL for multiple seasons. So I'm not worried about him breaking down, if he has over 300 touches. And if you touch the ball 300 times, regardless of what offense you play in, you're going to be a top 10 running back regardless. So Najee, maybe. I know he's kind of on the fringe of top 5. I know he was I believe he was 4th last year in half-point scoring. I don't think that's going to be his case this year. I think he's going to be more in the 7 to 10 range. And I think he's not necessarily going to be someone that is going to win you weeks. He's going to be steady body, steady commodity for you, but not necessarily someone that is the difference maker for your lineup.
Yeah, Harris is sort of similar to Henry in the sense that offseason changes of the offense, aside, regardless of what happened over the offseason, he's not going to get more volume than he got last season. So you need to see the efficiency numbers go up if he's going to maintain a similar pace. He has talked about wanting to come off the field a bit more and not be used with the same workload. So even if the Steelers wanted to, he might push to not, be getting the same number of catches. Do you think Harris will still end up among the league leaders among running backs in catches this year, and it's just not as much of an outlier, he's leading the position in that? Or do you think he will be more middle of the pack, even not necessarily leading the position in that stat?
I mean, I think that it's going to be probably closer to where we see in the majority of starting running backs kind of have the receptions, not the guys that profile, the Austin Ekelers, the Kamaras of the world, those are the premier pass catchers. We know Najee Harris is not this savant, pass catching running back. We know he's capable of catching passes because his quarterback's going to dump the ball down. He's just not going to have as many opportunities. If he caught 40 passes next year, that's not a bad number. But when you compare it to his rookie year, when he caught 75 or more passes, then it's going to matter a lot, especially in games where if the Steelers are trailing, the Steelers playing a brutal division. So if he's not capitalizing on opportunities when they are trailing in games, that's going to cause him to bust a lot. And even last year, despite the massive workload he got, there were a lot of games where he busted because he didn't score touchdowns or he just got a bunch of carries. And we know that carries inside the 20s or in between the 20s, they don't do much for anything. And Najee Harris isn't this super efficient running back. He's not the explosive type of a Jonathan Taylor. He needs the volume to produce. And if it's going to be coming less in receptions and more in carries, that's just going to negatively impact his fantasy points.
Last thing on Najee here, he's ranked 6th right now. Where would you have him ranked, Erickson, specifically?
So I believe I have him right around RB8. And I really think that's where he's going to finish, between 7 and 10. I don't think you're going to be Najee Harris killed my team, but I don't think you're going to be Najee Harris is totally blew out of the water for me. I think that we kind of assume he'll just take another step into year 2. But what you point out to, it's the dude already had 380 touches last year. He's probably going to catch less passes. And he already scored double-digit touchdowns last year. So why are we going to assume that he's just going to take? It's running back. It's not another position like quarterback or receiver where we see steps in year 2. If anything, we see a lack of guy's taking a step in year 2. I can't tell you all the times I thought, oh, Josh Jacobs is finally going to be involved in the passing game in year 2. Antonio Gibson is going to take this massive leap in year 2, and they just don't. They just kind of stay the same. So, yeah, I think Najee is really more of a back-end RB1 than someone that's going to be a top 5 guy.
Corey, before I move on, I actually do want to get your opinion on Najee Harris, just because he's such an interesting guy. He's the very easy consensus running back 2 in dynasty leagues. Obviously, he's a tier 2 guy, probably going near the end of the first round, early second. Is he a guy that you're definitely taking a receiver over, or would you be happy to get him with your first or second pick in drafts?
He's my RB4, so I have him up there where he's higher than he's currently going right now. I agree to an extent that all like his receiving workload, because he had that huge game against the Bengals where he had like 15 targets or whatever it was. But I do think it can't be overstated the fact that how inefficient he was on his workload last year. He was a super talented prospect, first round draft capital. The average age of 20 plus point per game running back scores, which are those league winning running backs that we chase like Jonathan Taylor last year, are usually 23 and a half years old. That's the average age. So I'm more on the side that Najee Harris takes an uptick from the efficiency side of things, and that helps maybe offset some kind of receiving work that he's losing not having a mobile quarterback. And I also think Big Ben was so trash last year that it might not be a huge upgrade with Mitch Trubisky, but it's marginal enough to the point that his touchdown upside might be a little bit more this year. So those kind of factors kind of outweigh for me any kind of receiving regression that he might see. Again, he does profile more as like the safe running back that won't lose you a league, which is why I will take Kupp, Jefferson, Jamar Chase over Najee Harris still. But he is my RB4 right behind Derrick Henry.
Before I move on with the show, I'd like to take a moment to talk to everyone about Pristine Auction. PristineAuction.com is the most trusted sports memorabilia site with just an A+ Better Business Bureau rating. Auctions on PristineAuction.com start at just $1, and each day there are over 1,000 autographed items available, so you win signed, authentic signatures at affordable prices. Just last week, an autographed Justin Herbert jersey sold for $110. Deals like this are happening all the time on PristineAuction.com, and they have just about every player you could want, including Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, and so much more. Every item on PristineAuction.com comes with a certificate of authenticity from the industry's most reputable authenticators. Upgrade your collection of signed memorabilia today and get $10 off your first item one when you use code FantasyPros, one word. Be sure to sign up now because there are deals ending every day. Again, that's code FantasyPros for $10 off your first piece of signed memorabilia on PristineAuction.com. Guys, let's move to tier 3. Corey, I'll start with you here, but first I'll read through the names for everyone. Nick Chubb, Aaron Jones, Leonard Fournette, Alvin Kamara, Javonte Williams, Saquon Barkley, James Conner, David Montgomery, and Ezekiel Elliott. Corey, who do you have?
Yeah, so as part of my cheating and not having a tier 1 running back, I do have 2 tier 3 running backs that I'm avoiding. The first one's Nick Chubb, and this completely hinges on the status of Deshaun Watson. But by all indications, it looks like he's not going to suit up for Cleveland this year. And if that's the case, there's no chance I'm drafting Nick Chubb, because Nick Chubb has been a solid back-end RB1 for a few years now, 3 top 10 finishes in points per game the last 3 seasons. But the issue for Nick Chubb has always been that he doesn't have a large share of his backfield. They use Kareem Hunt. Even when Kareem Hunt missed games last year, they were using a Dearness Johnson in the Kareem Hunt role. His best season came in 2020 with an RB7 finish in points per game. He missed a couple games, but he was still quite good on a points per game basis. But not shockingly, that coincided with the Browns offense being the highest scoring offense of Nick Chubb's career as a top 15 scoring offense. I expect Jacoby Brissett to be the quarterback of the Browns this year. It sounds like Baker Mayfield situation is reversible. It sounds like Deshaun Watson's going to get a whole year suspension, which will likely be the worst offense that Nick Chubb has played in his career. And he already has a low ceiling due to the workload that he gets. So in my opinion, the only path that Nick Chubb has to an elite season is a high number of touchdowns. And that's pretty hard to imagine happening with Jacoby Brissett leading the charge for the Browns this year. So unless Deshaun Watson's playing quarterback for Cleveland, I don't draft floor plays at running back, which is what Nick Chubb feels like.
If Deshaun Watson, I think we all are expecting a suspension and a lengthy one, and very likely the whole season. If for some reason he was playing, where would you have Chubb ranked?
I think Chubb would be in that back end RB1 range for me, similar to where I have Dalvin Cook. But I mean, there's so much smoke around him potentially getting more than a year of suspension. Yeah. So yeah, even if he was suspended 6 to 8 games, I probably wouldn't draft Nick Chubb.
And Chubb is currently ranked 9th. What number would you put to him right now, knowing everything we know?
I have Nick Chubb rank at 19th.
Okay. So another steep drop there.
5 yards per carry, man. Come on.
Yeah.
All right, I'll go to Erickson for his pick, and then we'll come back to you, Corey, for your second one here. So Erickson, who do you have here in tier 3?
Oh, this one's so easy. It's Dave Montgomery. Look, Dave Montgomery finished as a top 24 running back in fewer than half of his games last year. You have to draft him as a top 24 running back, and you're getting someone that isn't going to be a top or an RB2 in even half of his games. Like, what about the situation in Chicago is an indication or suggests that he's going to be better than he was last year? I think Justin Fields is still a good quarterback, but he's not going to catch a lot of passes with a mobile quarterback. And look, in my heart of hearts, I think that Khalil Herbert is better and more explosive than David Montgomery is. Like, what I saw from Khalil Herbert last year, I saw an explosive running back, a guy who put up RB1 numbers when he got the opportunity. And David Montgomery is like the classic dead zone guy. He's in there in the RB2 range because of projected volume. We're all like, all right, well, he's going to get all the touches, but it's a completely new coaching staff. No allegiance to David Montgomery whatsoever. So for me, like, I can easily skip on David Montgomery because I'm not going to look at him and be like, I don't know, man. Bears RB1. I mean, he might burn me this year. I don't know. I can't pass up on. I can easily pass up on David Montgomery. I don't have any desire to draft him with a top 20 RB ADP. So yeah, David Montgomery, no thanks.
So you sort of addressed this, but I want to just confirm this isn't about a lack of faith in the Bears and the offensive line as much as it is you don't think Montgomery is even definitively the best running back in that backfield.
I mean, it's all kind of factored into play, but I mean, if you watch Khalil Herbert last year when he started, like how different was he from David Montgomery? Like, he was putting up basically the same numbers that David Montgomery was. And people will just assume that, okay, well, David Montgomery's going to be the starter. Like, okay, like maybe he will be, but what if he's not? And you just blew your 4th round pick on David Montgomery, who plays in an offense that the market is not excited about. Like, the Bears are probably not going to be winning a lot of games next year. They surely did not give Justin Fields a lot of protection up front. That's not going to help David Montgomery. So, and if Khalil Herbert, if he even eats into Montgomery's, again, it's going back to this thing of if Montgomery's not getting the full workload, then this is going to be a big issue for him because he's not going to necessarily have the efficiency and he doesn't really necessarily offer the explosiveness that you'd like from a running back that's like uber talented. Like, we know David Montgomery's been this guy that's been able to get there because of volume. And he's been underrated for that for the first 2 years. But, I mean, he wasn't a guy that you could rely on as an RB2 last year. And people are drafting him like an RB2. And he was less than that in half of his games last year.
Yeah, one of those guys who he had that incredible end of the season a couple years ago that I think still sticks in the mind of some people. He's currently ranked 16th. Where would you have him ranked, Erickson?
I mean, I got him outside my top 20. I mean, I like that's the thing is like I have to put him in that range of because I'm not going to rank Khalil Herbert ahead of Dave Montgomery, like because I think that Dave Montgomery will still probably get more of the workload. But at the end of the day, there are a million wide receivers I would rather draft than David Montgomery. So he's just kind of in that back end RB2 range because I have to put him somewhere. And it's really just like all the tags in the Fantasy Pros ranking. I just have Dave Montgomery, avoid, just draft a receiver instead.
Corey, let's circle back to your second player in tier 3. He's a guy who's gotten a mention already today. When you compared him to Dalvin Cook, you're going with Zeke.
Yeah, I mean, the argument's pretty much the same, even to a higher extent that it is for Dalvin Cook. His play has fallen off the last 2 seasons. It's been visible. We've all noticed it. I think the further we get away from Ezekiel Elliott actually playing games, the more people are going to like him because they're going to project the Cowboys offense and get excited about him again. But this dude has 2,000 career touches, or nearly 2,000 career touches. His once elite opportunity share of that Cowboys backfield, 70% every year of his career, plummeted to 57.7% last year. And that was lower than Devin Singletary's of the Buffalo Bills. That was right around where Clyde Edward-Helaire was getting from the Chiefs offense. We have a guy who's another year older. Pollard's opportunity share, conversely, has increased every year, unlike Ezekiel Elliott's. And we have 2 injury-riddled seasons now for Zeke. It's time to let go, in my opinion. The ceiling projection, you said David Montgomery is the prime dead zone guy. Ezekiel Elliott is the dead zone running back of all dead zone running backs this year, in my opinion. The ceiling projection is a touchdown or bust guy because he plays in a good offense. I kind of envision if Ezekiel Elliott semi-hits, he's like Todd Gurley was in Atlanta for the first 10 games of 2019 before he eventually broke down as the season went along. I don't draft running back 2s in the first few rounds of drafts similar to David Montgomery. If I'm drafting a running back early, they better have an elite ceiling, 20 plus points per game in their range of outcomes. There's receivers in this area of the draft that have that in their range of outcomes, and there is not guy that I see with Ezekiel Elliott anymore. If this was 5 years ago, sure, but he's a little past his prime.
If we assume health for both players, what % chance do you think there is that by the end of the season, Pollard is the clear number one in the backfield?
I don't think it'll ever get to that point. I think the Cowboys are a little stubborn that way. They're probably going to use Zeke still on early downs. But if this is a 60-40 split or a 55-45 type of split by the end of the season, wouldn't shock me in the slightest. I just think whoever drafts Ezekiel Elliott still thinking they're going to get old time Ezekiel Elliott is going to be disappointed. He's probably going to finish as like RB11 in final finish because he played like 16 games or something. But I'm imagining it's like 13.8 points per game, and you're not excited about where you spent the pick on.
That is an exact argument I have heard Erickson make on this show about Zeke. So that's very fitting. Before
it's
we
not
move
a fun
on
ride, man. It's not a fun ride.
Before we move on from him, he is ranked number 17th. Based on how you've adjusted to some of these other running backs, I'm going to guess he's like 60th for you, Corey.
No, I have him at 23.
Okay. Definitely still a drop there. Let's move on to tier 4. We're now in the territory where tiers are a little too big to read all the names. But if tier 3 was sort of the veteran tier, tier 4 is a lot of youngsters, Breece Hall, J.K. Dobbins, A.J. Dillon, plenty of others. Erickson, who do you have here in tier 4?
I have Antonio Gibson. So last year, Gibson finished as an RB2 in just 53% of his games, so a little bit more than half. 3 of those games came in contests that J.D. McKissic didn't play in. So J.D. McKissic is back on the team, signed a deal with them. They drafted Brian Robinson in the 3rd round. I just can't draft Antonio Gibson in the first 5 rounds. Now, I know that sometimes especially in like best ball, you can get him in like the 6th round, which sure, like I'll take Antonio Gibson there. But in your standard home leagues, like I've seen him go in 2nd round, 3rd round, and that's just way too high of a price to pay for someone that it's like he's going to be an RB2 and then needs like 2 guys to get hurt to like be a back end fantasy RB1. Because I know that's what he's been. It's going back to this. Yes, he's been a back end RB1 the last 2 seasons, but that's why we're ranking where we're ranking him. Like we're projecting him based on what he's done in the past and not necessarily looking ahead of the future where it's like you kind of feel obligated to rank Antonio Gibson. Well, he's been an RB1, so maybe we should rank him as an RB1, like a back end guy. But it's like there's nothing about his current situation that screams that this is a big year for Antonio Gibson. Like at one point, when J.D. McKissic was going to sign with the Bills, it was like, oh, baby, wheels up. It was going to happen for Gibson. And then, poof, McKissic was like, now I'm going to sign back in Washington. They draft Brian Robinson, and it's just a mess now. So with rumors now talking about now he may not see the same goal line usage, it's just a mess with Antonio Gibson. And we thought that we'd see him take a step forward last year. He did not do that. And this has a lot of things have to go in his favor for him to pay off a fee of him being like a top 20 running back. So I have him basically ranked in the back end of 24, kind of right where Montgomery is, right where Zeke is, like just guys I just don't want. And that's where they go. They just go in the back end RB2 range, just a range where there's just not a lot of upside. And if they fall far enough in drafts, like sure, I'll take the floor with him because I know that he'll probably end up finishing probably better than where I have him ranked. But the weekly upside from that player, again, 53% of his games last year, he was an RB2. And they almost a lot of them came without McKissic. Like McKissic's going to play and eat into his receiving workload. So Antonio Gibson just not super high on him.
Gibson currently ranked 19th. He's definitely one of the running backs that I'm most confident will not end up on any of my teams this season because I just think there's always going to be somebody who likes him more than I do. There are some backfields that I like to stay away from because there's too many mouths to feed, like the Patriots. And there's some backfields I like to stay away from because I don't trust that offensive coaching staff to be competent, like David Montgomery in Chicago. Antonio Gibson checks both of those boxes. I don't trust the Washington Commanders from either angle of there's too many mouths to feed. I don't think they're going to let him be the number one, heavy volume guy. And then also, I don't think they're going to be a competent, well-run offense in general. So, I'm very much out on Gibson. I'm with you there. Corey, who's your guy in tier 4?
Yeah, so my guy, I don't personally even think he belongs in this tier. Miles Sanders for the Philadelphia Eagles. I think you can maybe squint and make a decent case for Sanders because this probably projects to be the best offense that he's played in his career now with, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith in his 2nd season, Dallas Goedert at tight end to draw attention away from Miles Sanders. Jalen Hurts is his 3rd-year quarterback now, 2nd year in the system, 2nd year as a starter. But I'm expecting the Eagles to skew more pass-heavy than they were last year. We all know they're a high-paced offense, but last year at the beginning of the season for the first 7 or 8 weeks, the Eagles were actually pass-heavy. They were not a run-heavy offense, And down the stretch, they went run heavy simply out of necessity because they had nobody outside of a rookie Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert to throw to. During this time, these first 7-8 games of the season, Miles Sanders had 5 games of less than 15 touches. So they were not using, their running backs in this fashion, on top of the fact that we know Jalen Hurts as a mobile quarterback is going to take away a big share of the team's overall carries. Nearly 30% of them in the 15 games that he played last year. That left only 337 running back carries for the team, or about 22 per game. And we know that Sirianni is going to mix in other guys. He's going to mix in, Kenneth Gainwell and whoever else, Boston Scott, that they have on the roster. That only is going to leave Miles Sanders 15 carries at most per game. And I don't mind Miles Sanders in best ball because, kind of to Erickson's point, people fade him to oblivion. He'll fall to the 9th, 10th round sometimes. But if this offense goes more pass heavy with limited volume at the running back position, this is a guy that I think home league drafters will still draft in the 4th, 5th round of drafts. And to me, I've said this a million times so far, I'm just going to take a wide receiver at that point.
Sanders is one of the most interesting evals right now because obviously the no touchdowns last year. Well, if he regresses to the mean and gets 6 touchdowns, that's a lot more points, going over there. He should be a guy that catches a lot of passes. They don't always use him in the passing game. And then when they do, he drops a lot of passes. It's I feel like there's so much that he should be and just quite isn't. Before we move on quickly, Erickson, where would you have Sanders ranked?
Well, I think it's important to talk about, when we're bringing up the regression argument for Miles Sanders, that's considering the fact that the Eagles run the ball at the same exact rate they did last year, which, like Corey mentioned, I don't think is going to happen again. So you can't double count. Oh, they're going to rush the ball just as much as last year, and Miles Sanders is going to get all the touchdowns that he should have scored last year. It's no. There's not any reason to think, okay, maybe he'll score 4 touchdowns instead of 0. Okay, that's probably more in his range of outcomes, but there's still a million reasons why Miles Sanders won't score that many touchdowns. The fact that the matter is he's not getting the red zone usage. And it's hard for him to yes, he can bust off a big run and maybe score a touchdown that way. Yeah, it's in his range of outcomes, but there's a reason why they had guys like Jordan Howard and Boston Scott, and they were using those guys instead of Miles Sanders. It's the same coaching staff. Clearly, they liked using those guys in the red zone more than Miles Sanders. Kenneth Gainwell, who's going to be on the field when the Eagles are trailing in games? It's probably going to be Kenneth Gainwell. He's the more proven pass catcher. Miles Sanders has been one of the, he's following in the footsteps of Jordan Howard as just this guy for some reason. We just can't seem to get him catching the ball with confidence. And sometimes there are running backs like that. Most running backs can just catch the ball, catch dump offs, but Miles Sanders has really struggled in that area of his skill set. So for me, Sanders is one of those players that if he falls enough, I'm yeah, okay, I see him having those spike weeks because he is a really explosive running back, and I like the Eagles offense. But I also know that he's a 0 in the passing game probably. And I don't know where the touchdowns are going to come. The fact that that the team went away from him so much, and Jalen Hurts is also a candidate to eat into those rushing touchdowns as well. He's someone that if he falls enough, sure, I'll take a shot on him, but definitely in redraft, where I'm trying to look for a little bit more consistency from the running back position, because you want to be plugging in guys that you're confident about their workload every week. Eagles running backs last year were impossible to project. Be oh, Kenneth Gainwell, finally wheels up. Oh no, Boston Scott. Oh wait, no, it's Jordan Howard week. Oh no, Miles Sanders is back. Oh no, touchdowns for him. It's the same coaching staff, and I don't think they have an allegiance to Miles Sanders is going to be our bell cow. Don't think that's going to be the case.
Yeah, all those running back names. And then, by the way, Jalen Hurts can run too. Let's go quick on tier 5, since these are guys that aren't really going to make or break your season anyway. Names like Tony Pollard, Melvin Gordon, Ramondre Stevenson, Chase Edmonds show up in tier 5. Corey, I'll start with you here.
Yeah, so this is a brand guy for me because I got called a hater for calling Clyde Edward-Helaire expensive Devin Singletary last year. They bring in Ronald Jones. They re-sign Jerick McKinnon. And for a good running back, this shouldn't matter. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire isn't really that good. So I had him as my biggest bust of the entire season going in last year. And we saw, even when he was out, Darrell Williams was getting the workload that we've all dreamed Clyde Edwards-Helaire would get. He's on the field on third down. He's running routes. He's getting receiving work. And Darrell Williams straight up outplayed and outproduced him from a fantasy perspective last year. And we also have random guys like Derek Gore stealing goal line work. I just don't think Clyde Edwards-Helaire even has a role in this offense. I think they're going to deploy a committee between Ronald Jones, maybe getting some in between the tackles work, goal line work, McKinnon, a sturdy pass catcher. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to mix in. I think it's going to be a running back by committee. CH is a fine NFL player, but I don't think the allure of the Chiefs offense is enough to carry him anymore. I think we know what he is at this point.
CEH is ranked 28th right now. Where would you have him?
Oh man, I got to scroll down pretty far to find him. I have him at 41.
Okay. Another steep drop there. Erickson, who do you have in tier 5?
So I have rookie running back Kenneth Walker. First of all, it doesn't even look like he's going to start the season as the starter. You know, Rashad Penny is going to be the guy that's going to start off the year. And right now, when Penny is healthy, like that's going to be the case. And Penny's proven. He balled out at the end of last season. He got paid. He has a top 10 cap hit this year. So Seattle has all the incentive in the world to use this running back that they signed that when he's healthy has been really good. So look, I'm not projecting Rashad Penny to play the whole year. Like that's probably not going to happen. But in trying to draft Kenneth Walker for your redraft leagues and then, I'm going to put him in the flex week 1. It's like, no, like you're not going to want to do that. Like Rashad Penny first has to get hurt. So down the line, sure, Kenneth Walker could probably have like a Rashad Penny-esque type of finish to the season. That's totally in his range of outcomes. But you're going to have to wait a decent amount of time for that to happen. You got to get Rashad Penny to get hurt. You got to make sure Chris Carson doesn't come back. You got to make sure that these other Seattle running backs, and by the way, the Seattle offense might just be trash, and you can't do anything with any of these running backs. Not to mention Kenneth Walker, pass game usage, total question mark. We have no idea whether or not he's going to be used in the receiving game whatsoever. He was not used in that fashion in the collegiate level. Doesn't necessarily mean he won't be used in it in the NFL level, but it doesn't work in his favor that we haven't seen it from him at all. And Seattle hasn't really been an offense that's really catered to featuring running backs in the passing game. Now, you could blame that on Russell Wilson being the quarterback, but even with Geno Smith last year, when he started, 3 targets per game for the running backs. So in an offense that projects to be behind in a lot of games, you don't want an early ground grinder that's potentially working in a committee. As explosive as Kenneth Walker is, again, we got to hit this home. Running back volume is more important than efficiency. It doesn't matter if he's averaging 5 yards per carry, if he's not scoring touchdowns, if he's not catching passes. Like you can only get you so far with 5 yards per carry, even if he is that efficient. So for me, it's Kenneth Walker.
Walker's currently ranked 33rd. Where would you have him, Erickson?
So I have Kenneth Walker. I think that I have him probably like in that similar range because I understand the allure behind, if Penny does go down, like, okay, it's like, great. So I have him at RB 36.
And where would you have him ranked if he was still going by Kenneth Walker and not Ken Walker?
RB 38.
All right. Now, Corey, you actually, as we move into our next segment, running back rankings fallers, have Kenneth Walker as one of your picks. Did you move him down because he changed his name to Ken Walker, or is it for more reasonable reasons?
Yeah, so I spent most of the Dynasty offseason talking about how he can't catch passes, so people kind of knew me as the Kenneth Walker hater, but I think he's one of the better running back prospects we've seen as a pure runner come out of college in a couple of years. But I think we do the same thing to Erickson's point with rookie running backs that aren't like first round Najee Harris is going to get the full workload guys, is that we expect them to get on the field and be the starter sooner than we think. And it usually takes them 6 to 10 weeks at minimum to secure a full workload. So even if Rashad Penny doesn't get hurt, which is definitely possible, I still think Kenneth Walker is going to be in a split backfield to some degree. And some of the biggest strategy points that I've adopted in my own, redraft leagues has been not drafting rookie running backs like Kenneth Walker, like Javonte Williams, like, Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift in their rookie seasons, and mid-season trying to trade for them when the opposing manager is fed up with the fact that they're not getting a full workload.
And how far has he fallen for you in your rankings?
So I actually had him higher than consensus. I had him at like the back end of the 20s for a while, and I've moved him down about to the mid 30s. I'm at 34 right now.
Erickson, who's your number one running back rankings faller?
So for me, it's James Conner, and I was really bullish on James Conner. Like in the free agency period, the team moved on from Chase Edmonds, and I was like, oh baby, like these splits without Chase Edmonds are like wheels up for James Conner. And then I kind of thought back, I took a step back. The team signed Darrell Williams, brought in another guy. And I kind of looked at it as I was extrapolating this smaller sample size for a Cardinals running back, which it's eerily similar to the fact that when we did it with Kenyon Drake, 8 games with Kenyon Drake and the Arizona Cardinals. Oh my God, this dude is an RB1, unfriggin' stoppable. And same coaching staff. It's like, I don't necessarily project James Conner to see the James Conner without Chase Edmonds workload in this Cardinals offense in week 1 of the 2022 season. It's pretty plausible to think that Darrell Williams and Eno Benjamin, who both profile as receiving backs in some extent, they both flashed in the receiving game, could just combine to put up the Chase Edmonds numbers in the receiving game. I think it's worth mentioning that if you look at James Conner when Chase Edmonds was healthy through the first 8 weeks of the season, James Conner had 8 rushing touchdowns. He had 5 catches through the first 8 weeks of the season. So James Conner's receiving surge at the end of the 22 or 2021 season was obviously because of the Edmonds injury. But again, it's a smaller sample size. Like, we have to look at this from a 16, 17 game projection for James Conner. And I don't think we're going to just see him get that same workload that he got without Chase Edmonds in the lineup. And that's what I was kind of doing when I initially ranked James Conner. I was locked and loaded as like a top 10 running back. Then I kind of took a step back and was like, you know what? I think I'm probably being a little too aggressive on James Conner, because people were kind of mentioning him as like a dead zone running back. And I was like, nah, like, what do you mean? Like, James Conner, like, he's got the projectable workload and he's like a little bit older. Like, oh my God, like, wait. Oh my God, I am talking about a potential dead zone running back. So that's why I kind of pumped the brakes a little bit on James Conner. I think that he's someone, kind of how we were talking about earlier, about a player that you maybe want to trade, because I could still see him seeing a ton of red zone usage. I think he's still going to get that, but he still scored a ton of touchdowns last year, and touchdowns are volatile year to year. Like, he's no guarantee that he's going to score as many touchdowns as he did last year. You look at what he did without in the 4 games where Chase Edmonds got hurt. 43% of his games, he was a top 12 running back. 4 of them came in when Chase Edmonds was hurt. 18 touchdowns last year, which was 6 more than over expectation. So I think that there's just some regression coming for James Conner, and I don't know if we're going to see the same receiving workload that we got at the end of last year.
Corey, who's your next faller?
Yeah, my next faller is actually, and it really pains me to say this because I love this guy as a player, but J.K. Dobbins, and it's really only injury related for me. I talked, like I said, with FB Injury Doc yesterday for my channel, and J.K. Dobbins had a compound ACL tear, and typically we see ACL tears be non-contact, where a player tries to make a cut and they blow their ACL out. But with J.K. Dobbins, he was actually hit on his knee, and that could mean that there's some PCL and meniscus damage, which is basically relaying what the doctor told me yesterday. And that 9 to 12 month recovery period for typical ACL tears could be in jeopardy. We've already kind of seen him have some setbacks, maybe. Like, he wasn't out there for minicamp. And if he's out there for training camp on the PUP list, or, not on the field, on the sideline, catching passes from the jugs machine, he's going to be completely off my board. On the other hand, if he's actually out there 100% for training camp for the preseason, he's ready to go for week 1, I might change my tune a little bit, but he's a little health dependent, because I do like his outlook. Even though he's not going to get a huge workload, he's going to be very efficient. He has, breakaway speed. He's part of a great offense that's going to keep him efficient and scoring touchdowns. But we were robbed of the second-year breakout that J.K. Dobbins could have been with the ACL tear, and it's possible that could leak into his third year as well.
Corey, you don't know this. I am a diehard Ravens fan. I did not need you to remind me a mental image of the actual injury happening when he got hit on the knee. I remember watching that preseason game at home and just crushed from a fantasy perspective, because we all thought he was going to be incredible that season, but crushed from a Ravens perspective as well. Also, the Ravens are a team that Gus Edwards is also coming off of the ACL, but they like to mix up their running backs too. They would prefer to have a committee approach. Now, if Dobbins is the clear best guy there, they can have RB1 type seasons in Baltimore for sure. But they also aren't going to be afraid to, especially coming off the injury, even if he is on the field, not necessarily give him that crazy workload. How far did you say he dropped in your rankings?
So I had him as my RB12. So I had him very, very high. And mainly because when Devontae Freeman was the starter last year, he was getting 4.5 targets per game. And J.K. Dobbins is one of the more underrated receiving backs in the league, in my opinion. I was expecting him to actually have, even though Lamar Jackson's the quarterback and he's mobile and he's probably not going to check down a lot, I was expecting them to feature J.K. Dobbins a little bit more. And then, like I said, efficiency, touchdown opportunity, got him up pretty high. He is now my RB19. So I still have him probably higher than consensus, I would imagine. But like I said, it's really going to hinge on how healthy is he for training camp. Is he playing in preseason games, or is he suffering setbacks?
Erickson, who's your next faller?
So my next faller here is Javonte Williams. And I think it just kind of comes in the wake of people just not reacting and not enough to Melvin Gordon becoming, signing back with the Denver Broncos. People will look at, it was a bad deal. Like he didn't sign for a lot of money. No one is signing running backs off the street for a lot of money. Like, it's not a position you need to prioritize. We saw that last year. Leonard Fournette got not much money from the Buccaneers. James Conner got less money than Melvin Gordon signed last year. And James Conner was a league-winning running back. So I don't look at the numbers and the timing of the signing, because every team knows we don't need to pay anything to get a running back body, a warm body in the running back room. So Melvin Gordon was a top 36 running back in 80% of his games last year while operating in a timeshare. And Javonte Williams is currently the highest drafted running back that finished fewer than half of his games as a top 24 running back. So for me, I think it's still going to be a split workload, even if Javonte is, the 1A to Melvin Gordon's 1B. But you need one of these guys to get hurt. And whichever one doesn't get hurt will be an RB1 and be like a guy you rank in the top 5 every single week. And I would rather just take that with Melvin Gordon, who showed last year that he is not falling off. Like, he was still very efficient from an efficiency standpoint last year. He has a full skill set, catches passes, has a connection with Russell Wilson dating back to college. I mean, hey, if we're going to talk about Devonta Adams and Derek Carr having a connection, why can't we talk about Melvin Gordon and Russell Wilson have a connection? Go Badgers, baby. So I think that Melvin Gordon is the much better value, and Javonte, I love the talent, man, but I hate the ADP.
Okay, first of all, Fitz is not on this episode. You don't need to give a Go Badgers for him. Second of all, just quickly, Erickson, we've asked this about a couple of other backfields with multiple names in it. Assuming health for both, what percentage chance do you see that by the end of the year, Javonte establishes himself as the clear number 1 guy?
I mean, look, ranking them last year, there was never any indication that they were changing up what they were doing. I tried looking at everything. I was like, just rank them back to back every single week because I didn't know how to separate them out. I tried to find an identification where Williams was taking over. Now, maybe it'll be a little bit more obvious under a new coaching staff, but Nathaniel Hackett came from A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. So, I think maybe that's the best case scenario where Javonte Williams is playing the Aaron Jones role and Melvin Gordon is playing A.J. Dillon's role. And last year, A.J. Dillon outcarried Aaron Jones in the second half of the season. So, I really don't feel confident in saying Javonte Williams is ever going to really fully take over the backfield, at least in year 2.
We've got one name left each going up here against the clock, so let's keep it quick. Corey, who is your last faller?
Yeah, this one's pretty straightforward to me. I have Kareem Hunt as one of my biggest followers. It's basically for the same reason as Nick Chubb, right? Kareem Hunt has averaged 13 opportunities per game since 2019 that he's been a member of the Browns. And when Nick Chubb is in the lineup, and if Deshaun Watson's not out there, 13 opportunities per game for a Jacoby Brissett-led offense is not going to lead to a lot of consistency. It's not going to lead to a lot of big fantasy production, no matter how good Kareem Hunt is. So currently, his appeal is obviously baked into the fact that he's Nick Chubb's handcuff, but I think his standalone value will be the lowest it's been in a couple years because that was always a side benefit. Like, we know he's the handcuff if anything happens to Nick Chubb, but he also had this, RB2 flex appeal that I don't think will be very present this year. I think we're going to be looking more so at a pure handcuff than we are a guy with a lot of standalone value.
And how far has he fallen for you?
I had him initially at the 25, I believe. He is now my RB 33.
Okay, and Erickson, who's your last faller?
I'm going to go with Damien Harris for the Patriots. I just love Ramondre Stevenson, honestly. I feel like that's the biggest thing with the Patriots running backs. I know you mentioned them earlier, Ryan, talking about how you just avoid Patriots running backs and Damien Harris as the not only most expensive Patriots running back, but most expensive Patriots player overall in fantasy. And it's not like he's going super high, especially in these best ball drafts. But you look at the workload at the end of last season, he split carries and touches with Stevenson nearly 50-50. Stevenson actually had more touches than Harris. And you look at Harris's expected fantasy points per game, he was RB 36 in expected points per game from weeks 9 through 18. He was RB 8 in actual fantasy points scored because he scored a bunch of touchdowns. He had 5 touchdowns over expectation. It's touchdown or bust for Damien Harris, and there's no reason to think that they're necessarily going to go away from him as the red zone guy. He was heavily featured there last season, but Stevenson definitely has the skill set to do so. And Stevenson's already shown a higher receiving ceiling than Damien Harris has shown at all, or basically has not shown at the NFL level. They're just not willing to keep Damien Harris involved in the passing game with question marks about James White's availability. I'm not on the Pierre Strong's going to take over for James White. That's just not the Bill Belichick MO to put a rookie in such a big workload. Ramondre Stevenson, what he was able to do as a rookie when Damien Harris got redshirted completely as a rookie, I think the sky's the limit for Stevenson, and I would just rather take a shot on him, see if Harris gets banged up, because I feel very confident that Stevenson would just absolutely smash if Harris gets hurt, where if they're operating in committee, I'm praying that Damien Harris scores a touchdown, or I'm looking at a guy that's going to probably finish outside the top 40 running backs for that week.
How far has he fallen for you?
So I haven't updated my rankings yet. I've had Harris in the back end of the RB2 range, and he's just he's like around a bunch of other running backs that I also don't like. So like trying to find reasons to like move him. It's like Damien Harris or like Zeke. Like I don't like either of them. And then it's like Montgomery's in there too. I'm like, so I have to do some finagling, but he's probably going to fall outside at least the top 24 guys.
So basically, once you get to that section, definitely look at receiver.
Well, yeah, because I think that's the big thing is like when you're fading running backs, it's because I like the receivers. I wish this was like, I know we already did the breakout wide receivers podcast, but that's really the reason why we have a reason to fade running backs and reason why it's tough and why our Corey wasn't able to come up with a tier 1 running back to fade, because it's like, no, like get me my studs in the top 2 rounds, skip running backs, and then draft receivers in the middle rounds. I just think that's the good strategy for drafting.
I promised the listeners mailbag questions. We only have time to get to one, so keep this quick. At Stick Stomper asks for our favorite redraft targets going past 100th overall in ADP. So no explanation, just give me a couple names. Corey, I'll start with you.
Might be cheating to piggyback off of Erickson's guy. I have Ramondre Stevenson is my highest exposure running back on Underdog Fantasy right now, because I think especially just that backfield in general, like best ball is the perfect format for the Patriots running backs because you don't have to choose when to start the guys. And like Erickson said, if Damien Harris were to get injured, I think Ramondre Stevenson would smash. So he's definitely one of those dudes that I'm, targeting. Do you mean all positions or just running backs outside?
Any position you want, any guys that stand out to you going past 100 in ADP.
Okay, so I also like keeping at the running back position. I love Tyler Algier coming out of BYU. I think, looking at his workload, it's very eerily similar to what we had set up for Mike Davis last year. Obviously, Cordero Patterson is going to be involved, but I liked Algier, the prospect. He handled a big workload in college. He's got the frame, the size to be able to handle a lot of carries. And I think with Arthur Smith coming from a system where he had a big physical running back like Derrick Henry, he's going to favor Algier on early downs and on the goal line. So I really like him as like a 11th, 12th, 13th round dart throw running back, because being a guy who always skips the dead zone, I typically build out a lot of like hero RB type of running back cores, and I need guys like Algier to help me fill out that RB2 production. So he's a guy that I really like. And then finally, I just love I love Garrett Wilson. If he's going outside the top 100 in ADP, I think he's one of the most undervalued rookies. I think he should be up near where Burks and London were, because I think they're all similar as prospects.
Erickson, how about you?
I'm going to go with, is Christian Kirk going outside the top 100 players?
He is. I actually just looked it up. So Garrett Wilson's going 108. Christian Kirk is going 109.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go with Christian Kirk. So I think that his ADP is wide receiver 42. And so he's like one of the cheapest wide receivers that flashed top 6 weekly upside. So he finished as a top 6 wide receiver on the week twice. Only one of 2 players outside the top 30 in terms of ADP, the other being Elijah Moore, to do it twice in 2021. I mean, Kirk projects to be the number 1 receiver in the Jaguars offense that is probably going to throw a ton. Look back at Doug Peterson's offenses. Nearly all of them ranked top 10 in pass attempts per game. And there's no way Trevor Lawrence can be as horrible as he was last year, because he actually has an adult as the head coach. So for me, I think Christian Kirk, he just flashed a lot of big play upside last year. He was a top 36 receiver in 63% of his games last year. Same as Michael Pittman and Tyreek Hill. That was Christian Kirk last year. And now he's the number 1 projected receiver in an offense that's going to be pass heavy. Yeah, Kirk is going to smash his ADP.
I should have learned my lesson. I said no explanation, just give me names. And of course, you both went into these long explanations.
See, this is why I like Corey, because he came on to break the rules. Usually I'm the only criminal on this podcast, just breaking all the rules, breaking all these tiers down. It's like, there are no tiers, just your tears from Ryan's face.
Wow. Okay. We had a really nice episode, I thought. This was a lot of fun. Great first performance by Corey. And you're here just taking shots at me on the way out. I don't know why I needed that drive-by. But thank you both for what I thought was an awesome episode up until the last 10 seconds. Hopefully everyone came away a little smarter today. Please, everybody, remember all the great opportunities we mentioned on the show, including the 2022 draft kit, our special premium offers, and of course, your free credit at Pristine Auction. Most of all, thank you, the fans, for listening. For Corey and Erickson, I'm Ryan Wormley. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.